It all started with the family group chat. Harmless enough, right? We'd shared everything in that space: birthday wishes, pictures of family gatherings, the occasional joke. But this time was different. It was election night, and as results trickled in, the tone shifted. My sister was celebrating, throwing around party emojis as the numbers showed her candidate leading. My mom joined in, making fun of her workplace for offering counseling services for distressed staff. Meanwhile, I sat there in silence, feeling the tension knot up in my stomach. They all knew where I stood, a moderate, leaning toward blue with no illusions about any side being perfect. But this was different. First, I tried to brush it off. We'd all been politically at odds for years, but we still managed to put family first. I thought maybe I'm overreacting. But when I scrolled through the messages again, seeing the celebration, the mocking laughter, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut. My family's beliefs, their support for things that went against everything I stood for, hit me harder than I expected. It felt as though they were laughing not just at my beliefs, but at everything I cared about deeply: empathy, compassion, and respect for others. The real issue wasn't just political, it was personal. My boyfriend, who'd been by my side for 6 years, was furious. He wanted nothing to do with them, especially my sister, who proudly displayed a Trump flag in her garage. It was a strange feeling. The man I loved was pulling away from the people who had raised me, who I had shared my entire life with. He suggested skipping Thanksgiving, and for the first time, I didn't try to talk him out of it. Part of me wanted to skip it too. How was I supposed to sit at the same table with people who seemed to disregard things that affected my friends, my community, and my own values? It wasn't just my family's support that hurt, it was their responses when I voiced my concerns. "We love you and our votes don't harm you," they'd say, as if their actions didn't have consequences beyond the ballot box. They told me it was all in my head, that I was overreacting. But how could I feel safe and understood with people who dismissed the struggles of communities I cared about? I thought back to my friends, some of whom had felt the harshest impacts of the policies my family supported. It was like they couldn't see the link between their choices and the real people they affected. I tried to rationalize, tried to chalk it up to political naivety or perhaps them being misled. But every excuse I came up with felt thinner than the last. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it simmered inside me. My family wasn't just voting for a candidate, they were supporting someone who seemed to dismiss people like my partner and friends and even fundamental rights. How could I reconcile this contradiction? Then there was the family history. I remembered growing up, watching my parents help those around them. They'd done things like gift a car to a family friend in need and cover rent for others. I'd seen them be radically empathetic to the people in their immediate world. But when it came to larger societal issues, it was like that empathy hit a wall. They talked about the economy, about immigration, as if those were things that mattered more than the human lives entangled in those policies. When I reminded my mom that her vote could affect her own children, especially my brother, who had a serious health condition and needed protections from insurance discrimination, she brushed it off, saying, "It won't come to that." Part that really threw me was that my mom was, in some ways, progressive. She'd always voiced her support for things like gay marriage and women's rights. Yet here she was, voting in a way that threatened those very things. And each time I confronted her, she'd say it was for the economy or the border crisis. My parents were upper middle class and didn't face the issues they were supposedly voting to fix. Felt like they were clinging to imaginary fears at the cost of real lives. I kept thinking, how could they be so compassionate to strangers yet so dismissive of the bigger picture? After the election, things only got worse. I'd been the lone voice in my family, the only one who had voted differently. My brother, who rarely cared about anything political, acted like it was all just noise. My sister, who had a mixed-race child, supported a candidate whose rhetoric put her son at risk. Contradiction was almost unbearable. Did they not see it? I wanted to shake them and say, "Look, these aren't just political beliefs to debate over Thanksgiving dinner. These are people's lives." Eventually, I had to pull away. I couldn't bring myself to stay in the group chat, where political memes and smug comments only deepened my frustration. I needed space to process, to figure out how to move forward. But it was like a wound that wouldn't heal. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted, if I was letting emotions cloud my judgment. And yet, every time I thought about reaching back out, the anger flared up all over again. The people who'd raised me, who I'd shared everything with, seemed more like strangers with each passing day. With the holidays approaching, the tension became even more unbearable. I was torn between wanting to forgive them, to go back to family dinners and shared traditions, and the realization that nothing had really changed. My family would still vote the same way if given the chance, still dismiss the real-life consequences their choices had on people like me and my partner. The loneliness that followed was deep, almost like grieving a loss. I felt like an outsider not just in the world but in my own family. People who'd once been my support system now felt like they were on the other side of a wall I couldn't break through. There were days I'd sit and wonder if I'd ever truly feel like I belonged again. I knew I wasn't the only one going through this. The division was tearing families apart across the country. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. Sometimes I think about calling them, trying to bridge the gap. But then I remember the silence, the dismissive words, the laughter over something that was so painfully real for me. How can I go back to a family that doesn't understand the impact their choices have? For now, I'm taking things one day at a time, holding on to the hope that someday maybe they'll see things differently. Until then, I'm learning to accept the distance and to find a new path forward on my own.